From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We are joined, as always, with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Deckett. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Happy 2023, everybody. Congratulations to all of us. Go team. There is currently not a third world war, right?
That we know of.
No third world war. No, just a sixth mass extinction.
Yes, there it is.
Always with a silver lining, Matt, you know?
yeah, there it is. So it's crazy, right? Most of the people listening today do not have personal experience with World War II. If you are human, it is most likely going to be a memory of a parent, probably a grandparent, maybe a great-grandparent. People aren't thinking about a full-scale world war the way they would think about Vietnam or Iraq, etc. And the problem is, history is, again, much closer than it looks in the rearview mirror, and that's why billions of people are convinced a third world war is on the way. Not so much a question of if, as a question of when. There's no shortage of predictions about how this war might occur. I mean, Matt, Noel, it wasn't too long ago that we said there's a high likelihood World War III could occur over water, right?
Oh, over like as I'm sorry, I'm picturing like over water, like an air war, but no, this is water, the resource. We're going to fight for that stuff to the death.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, weirdly, in recent news, California and the Western United States has been drenched in a terrible way, but at least some of the reservoirs got filled.
Here he goes with the silver lining again.
Silver lining.
He's our guy. Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thing once you take into consideration other impending issues like climate change, where you could be like, oh yeah, that's cool, we're getting more rain in these arid regions, but it also portends something potentially ominous, the fact that that didn't used to happen like that.
Well, and it causes landslides, mudslides, flooding, and terrible things. Yeah,
just general holes in the ground will occur out of nowhere, right? And privatized insurance is a thing, so privatized insurance may say, you didn't get the extra hole policy for your crazy random, sinkholes. So good luck and good hustle.
Hey, can we just say, too, I mean, like the kinds of insurance you're required to have if you live in like a floodplain or whatever.
Oh, yes.
They're pretty limited. I mean, you have to have them, but it's not like it's going to make you whole most of the time. If my experience with insurance is any indication, unless you're going that
make
premium
you whole,
route.
No pun left behind. Well
Indeed.
done.
Make you, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, no shade out there directly, I guess, if you're in the insurance game. But I think we all know that there are some real shortcomings with these things to the folks that maybe can't afford just the absolute top tier levels of coverage.
Noel, what does your hat say?
It's pretty good. I was looking at this earlier.
It says f***ing awesome.
Oh, okay.
In a positive way, Matt.
Yeah, I think it's like a skateboard company or something. I did buy it at a skateboard shop. I do not skateboard, but my kid is starting to try, so I'm allowed to wear this hat, damn it.
So it's not in any way meant to insult the idea of awesome. It's just adding to it.
It's like that line in that Macklemore song, about popping tabs at the thrift store. He says, "This is being awesome." That's just my outlook on life. Hopefully.
That guy's government name also is
Benjamin Macklemore, Xavier Esquire the Third. I think it comes from royalty. That's my theory. I don't know.
Well,
you know what?
he's definitely well traveled, as are many celebrities. The average person has a difficult time traveling that widely. And so it can be very scary to think about the world and have some weird doomsday prophecy about things going inevitably in a chaotic direction. You know, wars over water, climate refugees, two very true things. A domino of nuclear detonations, because once someone shoots a gun, it's no longer a standoff. It's a hot war.
Oh, yeah. Well, it makes me think of I don't know if you call it a border dispute, but the dispute with the South China Sea that's been going on, where tensions are rising higher and higher as people, as other governments and their militaries encroach a little bit further just to see where those lines are in what China believes is their property, I guess.
Also interesting use of language in justifying it. We called it just now the South China Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Other countries in that part of the ocean do not call it the South China Sea. So what we're looking at here is what is legally called, between just two countries, a differing perspective or differing territory. Today's episode is about one possible cause for a third world war. It's one that might be unfamiliar to many of our fellow conspiracy realists. It's a beef with China and India. Here are the facts. They're big. They're big. They're big deals.
Yes, they're big deals as countries because of their size, their actual land mass, and the number of human beings that live within the borders of those countries. And they're also a big deal because they got this little technology that, we humans developed in the 40s. It's called nukes. Heard of it?
Yes. Also, putting a positive spin on things, these are seats of ancient cultures, invented so many things. China and India, historically, not perfect. Few countries are, right? But they did big stuff. And you're right, Matt. They're literally the biggest countries in terms of population, right? We're keeping the U.S. bracketed. The U.S. and the EU are distant thirds and fourths, respectively. Now, how many people are we talking in China and India?
Well, they're very populous places, let's just say, and we can put some numbers to that. With China being the number one most populous country on the planet with 1.4 billion people, India is nipping at its heels, at a close second, with over 1.38 billion residents in that country. And that leads to a super fun statistic that you found, Ben. If you picked a single person at random out of every single individual on the planet, that random person is most likely to be either from India or China. That's a fun game.
Yeah.
We should try that. No, that's hard. Too hard. We'll just keep it in the realm of conceptual examples.
Yeah. And if you took a big picture of planet Earth and looked at the two land masses that comprise China and India, and you thought about the number of humans that are on there, and then you thought about that statistic, right? You may think, everybody here, they must have a lot in common. They must be like pretty good friends. They're really close. They've been around together for, thousands and thousands of years, as Ben pointed to in their ancient civilizations. They must be pals.
Not so much.
Well,
maybe,
kind of.
right?
There's a lot of trade, right?
There is trade, but culturally, a lot of differences in terms of maybe priorities, morals, things like that. They're just kind of based in those ancient cultures that you're talking about. They may get passed down generationally, and there really are some pretty significant divides between the two countries.
Yeah, that can feel weird to people in the West. These cultures, these modern nations, are so old that their history descends into legend and myth at some time. What we're saying is two very big deals who have a lot in common and happen due to geography to be a little bit complicated. You know, they have historically worried about their borders, primarily about their borders with other countries, not even talking about them together. India is very worried about Pakistan. It's stressing some other stuff in the Himalayas. We know about China in the West. That's the reason all of us on this show are about 50-50 to getting into mainland China through legal means. So this all leads us to something a lot of Westerners don't think about often. How did China and India get along? Would they ever enter open combat in the modern age in a way that would trigger a third world war? And so it's such a weird question.
Yeah. And again, not one that people in the West ponder very often. I certainly don't. I mean, I don't think we've really not talked about it outside of recording the podcast before until we started really doing research. I mean, I'm sure some of us, I'm sure we're aware of it to some extent, the tensions and some of the stuff that's been popping up in the news. But when it comes to an existential dread feeling about the next thing that sparks World War III, it hasn't been on my radar.
Yeah. What about you, Noel?
I mean, I just, like you said, the idea of a world war sort of seems like a relic at this point. It just feels like there's more kind of small conflicts surrounding specific issues, or maybe we come into the aid of a country, you know, if it sort of serves our interests. But like, I don't know, the closest thing maybe I could see would be what's happening in Ukraine, and just like, you know, the maneuvering of someone like a dictator type figure like Putin, who maybe, you know, while it's certainly not on par with what was going on with Hitler, it's the kinds of actions when escalated farther enough, the world sort of demands, you know, action. And I don't think we're there yet, you know, with that, but that's the closest thing that I could think of. I guess it just feels like the world is interconnected in such a way now that maybe it wasn't during the eras of the first two world wars. So it seems less likely for it to be an all-out, all-encompassing, everyone's on board on one side or the other, you know, conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. The idea that we are at the end of history, the idea that wars as understood in previous millennia no longer apply. Like the idea of a world war when everyone is financially connected becomes a very different conversation. So as we're saying now, a lot of people aren't aware of this tension between China and India, nor how specific it is. You will see authors writing about it in near future sci-fi, like Neil Stephenson's Termination Shock. But this is a real thing. It's a border most people in the world will never visit. It is constantly shifting. It's about 2,100 miles long. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's not a place you would go for fun. It's in the Himalaya mountains, and not the fun part. And neither the government of India nor the government of China will actually call it a border. And they've been beefing about this for decades. Instead, for many decades, they have been calling this the, quote, line of actual control. As we record today's podcast, it is the largest, most dangerous border dispute on the planet.
And in researching this, it feels to me like a little bit like the DMZ that we talked about between the DPRK and South Korea, but it's amorphous in a very different way. It feels like it can change to really, really change like depending on which side you're on and what you decide to believe in the moment, if you're a commander, let's say, or somebody who's in charge of a military there. I can't wait to get into this. But why don't we take a quick break and we'll come right back in and learn about the line of actual control.
Here's where it gets crazy.
So the story really starts back in the late 50s when India and China had a proper beef, got properly beefed up. In modern history, these countries have fought only one war against each other, mind you, the Sino-Indian War, which took place for just a single month. Seems like not that big a deal, right? From November to October of 1962, India lost that conflict or confrontation or whatever event you want to call it. And China unilaterally declared a ceasefire. But let's just not forget that a ceasefire really is just kind of like pressing pause on a conflict, and it can be rescinded at any time. Sometimes ceasefires can go on for a very long period of time if an actual official declaration of an end to the war can take place, right? So like a ceasefire, Ben, could last years.
Sure. Yeah. And I like that you brought up the Korean Peninsula, because that war also has not ended. There's an armistice, right? So this ceasefire in 1962 means that the countries never agreed on what constituted a border. They just started using the phrase line of actual control, which is, and this is on purpose, and none of us are proud of this. This is an example of the overuse of the phrase liminal space in context. I know, Matt, I see you.
Well, we love liminal spaces. We talk about them all the time. It's like a place between the place. Like the airport is a good example of where, I mean, it actually can be a real example in terms of like where duty-free rates apply. You're not actually in the U.S., but you're not actually in the country yet. So you're in this kind of middle ground that allows you to buy whiskey in bulk without paying tax. But if you see that duty-free shop and you're not, on an international flight, you're not in that space, but you're still in the liminal space that allows you to have a drink at 8 a.m.
So two of the most populous countries on the planet say, hey, let's just agree that we do not agree. And let's look at the facts on the ground. Who controls what? And they mapped it out. You can look at any number of these attempts to map out the line of actual control. But be aware, folks, the maps are wildly different.
Yeah. But either way, no matter what your map looks like, let's say you're either China or India, you say, even though we're not really sure where these lines are, let's definitely put a bunch of troops like as close as we can get to whatever that thing is on both sides, which is always, a way to really reduce tension. If you imagine the countries as stressed out individuals.
How would you map? How would we illustrate or demarcate the line of actual control?
Well, guys, I do not know this region very well. I am a guy in Atlanta talking to you about it. This information comes from the Hindustan Times. And where are they quoting, Ben?
Oh, they are quoting members of Indian military.
Well, there you go. So this is maybe one perspective on where the line is.
As well as Indian government outside of the military.
Got it. Well, this is what we have. The line of actual control runs between China's Tibet Autonomous Region and the Indian states of Arunachal Pradesh in the northeast, Himachal Pradesh, and Uttarakhand and Ladakh in the north. And I pronounced those things incorrectly. I apologize. Those are names that you likely aren't aware of, but you can look some of those things up if you wish.
Yes, perfect. If you pull up a world map and you zoom in to southwestern China, call it that, right? And you see the the Himalayan mountains, then along that line, essentially wherever there is not a Nepal or a Bhutan, then there is a Chinese-Indian border dispute or an Indian-Chinese border dispute.
And there are two major areas on either side, right?
Right. The sides that are not Nepal and Bhutan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. They're in the middle because they're higher up in the mountains. So, like you said, Matt, there are troops on both sides of this not a border trademark, and they get in fights all the time. And both countries are terrified of giving any ground, which is weird because they feel like nothing occurs in a vacuum. So if either side of the LAC or line of actual control gives an inch, they will lose a mile. And maybe we can talk about some of their concerns.
Yes, indeed. Concerns on both sides. To the west, the LAC line of actual control runs along the already quite tense Kashmir border. India is also very worried that Pakistan might use any territorial shift to kind of bolster their own claim to Kashmir. And this is a very reasonable concern. So they're not going to give at all if they can do anything in their power to keep from doing so. The Western LAC also runs along the Chinese-controlled Aksai Chin region, also known as Eastern Ladakh. You mentioned earlier, Matt. This is basically, well, actually, Western China, Xinjiang, Uyghur territory, which is, as many listeners know, we've talked about it plenty of times, is an ethnic group that has been on the receiving end of some pretty awful discrimination and horrible treatment by the government of China. And as the government of China continues to crack down on that population through various programs of assimilation, they also don't want to give any territory to India because it could further destabilize an already kind of iffy, region of control. These are kind of, geopolitically speaking, razor thin margins we're talking about here.
Because right in that same area, at least the maps I'm looking at, it's not circular necessarily, but it looks like a small circle where you've got China on one side, you've got India kind of coming up to a point, and then Pakistan right here. And like you were saying, Ben, like it does make total sense that India would be super weirded out about any kind of development within the border there within that circle or the other line of control between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Imagine, if we're making it a microcosmic example, let's imagine you live in a subdivision and you hate your neighbors, but you have the same backyard fences. And you all moved in when there was some sort of chain link fence already there. And so now you're starting to think about whose backyard is whose, right? Or whom's is whom's, if we're being fancy. So this is a dangerous thing because one tremendous point stands out. China and India are nuclear powers. If you look at the other side of what's called the line of actual control, you will see that east of Bhutan, there's a whole other thing geopolitically. And the main thing we need to know for now is this. Neither of these sides, neither India nor China, ever agreed on an actual border. Both of them are powerful. As you said, Matt, both of them can launch nuclear weapons. And they both have, as you said, Noel, incredibly understandable fears about what would happen if they give an inch, And maybe the best way to put it is that what we're looking at is two immovable objects that find themselves occupying the same space. It is not a sustainable calculation.
It's not even possible. Physics says no.
Physics says no. Okay, so why is there not a war?
Well, as we're recording this, there isn't one yet. Hopefully, when we get back, there still won't be one, because we're going to take a quick break.
And we're back. Why indeed isn't there that war that we've been teasing at this whole time, or maybe at least asking the question of what does it take for this to happen in this day and age? Weirdly enough, India and China are, as you mentioned, both of you, Matt and Ben, mentioned, economically reliant on one another to a kind of absurd degree. They are very much part of a delicate balance in terms of how much they need each other for imports and exports and all of that. And a lot of that has to do with that proximity that we talked about. India is China's second largest trading partner. From 2021 to 2022, this trade relationship was essentially the equivalent of $11.583 billion. That would be an absolute catastrophe if it was messed with. And this is something that folks are taking into serious consideration when making these kinds of plays or deciding whether or not to do so with these territorial disputes.
And just to be clear, that is China trading goods to India.
Right.
Yeah. And US dollars. It's a lot of money. And look, there's no secret. The government of China has tremendous military capabilities. So if everything else were taken out of the equation, it would be a pretty one-sided war. But, nobody wants to have these huge conflicts. As a result, after a bunch of low-level skirmishes and back and forths, things got a little bit less heated back in 1993. September 7th of that year, both countries came together and said, well, we still don't agree, but we're going to do it politely. That's what they did.
I like that. I know. I just like that. Well, yeah, let's just kind of keep this thing as it is. It's this thing known as the Border Peace and Tranquility Agreement.
Tranquility.
That's
I love
nice.
the inclusion. It seems lovely.
Yeah. It did this little thing where, how did you put it, Ben?
Oh, they just said they're going to keep the status quo. They're going to continually disagree politely until they find a permanent solution. And they're going to work together to build confidence.
See, that's confidence building in itself.
Hey, well, they did some cool stuff, right? They said, look, we're going to control the amount of force and the type of force we use on this part of the world that we disagree about, right? And they specifically said neither side shall use or threaten to use force against the other by any means. They also said no activities of either side shall overstep the line of actual control. So you can talk big, you can wave flags, you can do, to your earlier point, to Noel's earlier point, Noel, you noted the enmity between these forces. You guys remember the Pakistani Indian border ceremony?
Sure.
Right? Matt, do you know?
Oh yeah.
About?
The marching with the legs up really high and
it's like all the way to their foreheads. Yeah.
Yeah.
They got a horn.
I mean, this is essentially that line in the sand everyone's always talking about, or like the one in the Looney Tunes cartoons where, Bugs Bunny consistently crosses it and then keeps redrawing it until inevitably somebody falls off a cliff.
Except in most cases, there is no line. You're in the mountains.
It's a conception. It's a line of the mind. It is definitely 100%.
Well, yeah, and that's why they put things in there that basically stated, let's say if you're a bunch of troops, you're going through the mountains in this region and you realize all of a sudden, oh crap, I'm on the wrong side of this thing. They put language in there to say if you find yourself in that position, you just back off, go in the correct direction for whichever country you are representing, and we're going to say it's okay. Because remember, when you're here, you are a peacekeeping force. You are not a military.
Right. Yeah. Oh, the weather misled us. We're south of the mountain. We got to get north of that real quick.
Let's go.
Let's remember, we all agree. Okay. So spoiler, neither side considered this a ideal situation. They had a lot of hand-to-hand combat, a lot of on-the-ground disagreements about who was on which side of which line. So the governments of India and China go back to the drawing board in 1996, same year as the Olympics in Atlanta, Georgia. And they totally did not care about that because they were trying to make sure there was not a nuclear war. And this 1996 deal gets pretty explicit. This is the one that says, quote, neither side shall open fire or hunt with guns or explosives within 2 kilometers from the line of actual control, realizing, as we know now, that neither side agrees on what the line of actual control is. That's why they said 2 kilometers. They said 2 clicks because they were
Plus
thinking
or minus, you know.
no guns anywhere. Oh, there's probably one right now who's like, now kilometer by elevation or a kilometer by like flat distance.
European swallow or African swallow, you know? I mean,
Just so.
But think what that means. That's 4 kilometers in total, right? 2 kilometers from either side of whatever the line is. That's a big old swath of land right there if you measure it all the way across.
seems a little wasteful, doesn't it? But also, like, I mean, isn't this the kind of situation, like, it would really take somebody flexing on the other side and to create a conflict or to create an event or an incident, let's just call it, that might lead to a conflict, like, you know, shooting somebody who crossed their idea of the line.
Or it's just some hapless hunter out there who is doing their regular hunting with explosives thing.
Yeah, it's like fishing with dynamite. You know, everybody knows that's the best way to do it.
Those snow leopards are everywhere. You know,
Just got grenades and just
you got to get them. You got to hunt the snow leopards with grenades, apparently. But this is true. Since 1996, there have been no firearms, quote unquote, allowed, and that agreement has been broken many times. What it's led to largely is a series of grudge matches, hand-to-hand combat. You like UFC, you like MMA, you like mosh pits. There's a Himalayan mosh pit right now. People are hitting each other with sticks. People are throwing stones. There are broken bones. There are no AKs or Kalashnikovs.
It is real-time on-the-ground Krav Maga training.
There it is. Yeah, and there was an incident in 2020 in Galwan Valley that led to fatalities. This was one of the most significant border escalations in quote-unquote peacetime in modern history, right? And both sides, by the way, blame each other for the event. And no one wants to be responsible for starting an actual war. Like you guys pointed out, like these countries are economically reliant upon one another, and that's why you can see multiple videos on your browser of choice where it looks like people moshing in uniform. It looks like two large crowds just pushing each other. It's weird. The most recent videos that went mainstream came out 3 weeks before we recorded this episode on January 9th, 2023. How would you guys describe that one?
I'm seeing barbed wire on one side that appears to represent some kind of border, but then troops from either side it looks like lumber, honestly, in some cases. In other cases, huge makeshift clubs, and they are, as you said, literally hitting each other and pushing each other, even though there is a razor wire or barbed wire fence in between the two groups.
Doesn't look very pleasant.
No.
This is what you call a skirmish, right? Like a little border skirmish where, there's again, an incident. But hopefully it doesn't result in a bunch of fatalities, because if it did, that would escalate.
It is strange because it does appear that there is a concentrated large group of one of the sides. It appears to be perhaps the Chinese troops that are kind of corralled, maybe, and they're just not really moving, but they are being attacked. It's that's what it looks like from my view.
And also, I like that you're bringing up views. Who is holding the camera, right?
Somebody on the Indian side, it appears.
So there's a propaganda aspect to this war as well. There are loads of domestic reports in both countries that entirely seek to justify activities to support their perspectives. India claims that China has expansionist aims. They say China conspires with Pakistan. They also say that China is attempting to swallow up more territory each year, particularly as glaciers shift. Himalaya mountains are home to a treasure trove of fresh water. And that water is, not going to be in glacier form for long.
Well, yeah, and as it recedes, that muddies the water. It really does. I didn't even mean to do it, but it does. It changes where the perceived border perhaps is, and is the border actually along the glacier, as though you would line a border along a river? Let's say it's very common for humans to do that. What if the border is supposed to be along that glacier line? If the glacier recedes, then does that line stay in the same spot on the land, or does it go and move with the glacier?
Mm-hmm. And they, I believe the agreements call that a matter of differing perception, which is, again, a very polite sounding way to fundamentally disagree with someone. And let's be honest, if these were just regular street scuffles between gangs or kids in a playground, you might see it become a meme or a footnote, right? The problem is, even though these are not conflicts with firearms, often, we're talking about proxies for two nuclear capable countries. And let us not forget, people are dying. And that's what this makes us think about. You could say, hey, that's a regional conflict. That's between them. But if it's two countries do not a world war make. You know what I mean? Like, you would need more countries. You'd need, what, 40% of the world's countries to make a world war?
I don't know how they calculate that.
I've always wondered that. I mean, yeah, what doth a world war make?
Is it just three countries in very different parts of the world?
How many
is it about
superpowers?
Sort of coalitions, right? Like, it's about sort of, yeah, it's like you band together and then you have a conflict, and then you I guess, yeah. At what point did World War I become World War I? Because that was also, they had to kind of coin that term, right? Even back then.
I feel like I remember at least 3 different mixtapes in the early 2000s where someone declared a world war, and that didn't catch on. They never got to the UN. They were just rapping, I think.
Maybe that's part of the question behind all this too, is like, you really brought up a good point. These are sort of labels that we put on things and sort of run with, and it really is maybe there is, diplomatically speaking, some sort of metric for what the the criteria for a world war is. I don't remember it from history class though.
It's when you invade Poland. That's when it becomes a world war.
It's when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot.
We've got to stop invading Poland. You know what I mean? Just as non-Polish people.
Oh, there are criteria. Let's see. It says, in order to qualify as a world war, at least one of 3 criteria must be met. It has to take place between multiple nations across the globe. Battles are fought in many different locations. These are still very vague. And the war must be fought against great powers with significantly advanced technology. This is bullsnap. Whatever this is. Sorry, I don't buy this. This is from homework.study.com.
What? Yeah.
Wow, somebody got a D in college. Woo-hoo. All right, so that's the problem, you know. I do note that it's valid to talk about the real estate, though. The war is like real estate. It's geography. It's location, location, location. Geography determines the outcome of geopolitics as much, if not more than, human tactics and policies. So if China and India did enter a conflict, if they were deploying munitions or sending jets over that airspace, which was quote unquote restricted airspace, the jets flew earlier, I'm pretty sure. If they escalated this war, it would not just be between those two countries.
No. That's why we pointed out at the beginning of this episode how important trading partners China and India are to each other. I would say probably India, a little more dependent on China just because they receive so many goods. Same thing with the US and how many goods we receive from China. And it does make me wonder, so if that beef got bigger, the US might have to support China, which is a weird. This is the first time I've had that. Would that be true? Do you think that would be true, Ben?
I am not. I am not privy to the geopolitical conversations that occur behind.
I hear you. I just think it feels to me like it would almost be necessary.
Economically.
Yeah, it'd have to be a play that would have to be made. That's creepy.
You'd have to think about Korea, the Korean Peninsula, Japan, Australia. There's so many variables, right? What's going on with Pakistan, which is a friend to China, right? So these other players get sucked in. There's a domino effect. If China and India declare war, then Pakistan must take a stance, right? Japan must take a stance. Russia would be a different case. At this point, what we can say is that there are literally billions of people in China, literally billions of people in India. Well, 1 billion each, which means billions of people overall who are innocent. They have nothing to do with it. They're not involved in this stuff in the middle of nowhere in the Himalayas. But we also have to mention, I love the point earlier about how world wars start. You can dismiss these kind of things, but no, you brought up Franz Ferdinand, commonly referred to as, the spark that started World War II.
Yeah, I mean, and it really is kind of like how the history books write it or what we agree on, because I was, again, I'm looking through this after that idiotic take that I rattled off. I saw an interesting perspective that some historians believe that the 30 Years' War has more claim to be called World War I than World War I does, just because of the number of, parties involved. It really is just a matter of a war, fought between major nations.
And it doesn't take much to spark off a great conflict. And with this, I don't know. I think we have to ask ourselves, is the line of actual control a thing that will turn into a border within a few years? I hope it doesn't lead to a war. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't think it will, just because of where it is. Imagine fighting a full-scale war in that territory, in those mountainous areas, at that elevation, with those temperatures. It just feels like a really bad place to have a hot conflict.
Who would have the upper hand, do you think?
China.
Yeah.
They already
Yeah.
won once,
Exactly.
right? Pretty handily. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, they would win till India called Uncle Sam.
Because that is a thing right now. India and the United States, I don't know too much about it, but the relationship there is getting closer and closer.
Yes. Yeah. And it's part of the U.S. strategy to contain China, what they see as Chinese expansionism, which is, insulting if you're a Chinese nationalist, right? Don't try to box me in and so on. I don't know. I keep thinking about it. I am tempted to agree. I doubt this is the likely cause of World War III, but consider this. If you wanted to start World War III, this would be a great place to start. This would be a great place to false flag some stuff.
Yeah.
All you need, it's relatively simple, right?
Hey guys, I'll be right back. I'm gonna go do a little false flag action here. Like, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm starting a war. I don't know, just bored. Let's do it.
I'm trying to think of why, like, what would be the motivations? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to understand some of the machinations there.
No, I couldn't see a real reason either. It seems it would cause a chain reaction that would, really ripple outward and affect our relationship with those countries and our ability to do trade and all of that. So I don't know. Don't think it's in anybody's best interest.
Yeah, unless it's an overall, population reduction plan by someone in a darkened study who's just come up with a way to kill, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people in a couple swift moves. I don't know. It's feeling more and more like some people might be thinking that kind of stuff, and it's freaking me out a little bit, guys. But that's okay.
Same, right? So let us know if you are acquainted with this border. Let us know your thoughts. Do you believe that there is some sort of world war? What defines a world war? What can you tell us and your fellow conspiracy realist about the relationship between China and India? We'd love to hear your thoughts. We try to be easy to find online.
We do, and you can do that by reaching out to us on Twitter and on Facebook, where we have a Facebook group called Here's Where It Gets Crazy. You can join, be a part of the conversation there. And those exist under the handle Conspiracy Stuff Show. So we go by on Instagram.
Yes. Don't forget, just in case you did, we do have a book and an audio book. It's titled Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. If you want it, you can find it. So go look for it if you're curious.
And if you're acquainted, if you're illuminated and initiated into the book and you have some opinions about it, we would love for you to give us a call. The number 1-833-STDWYTK. What happens if someone dials that number?
Well, it's so cool, you guys. There's a tone. There's a Ben. And he goes, leave a message. It sounds way cooler than that. And then you've got 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname. React however you want. Tell us a story. We don't care. It just has to be under 3 minutes because the system will cut you off. Let us know at some point in the message if we can use your name and message on one of our listener mail episodes. It's that simple. If you don't want to talk to us via your voice, why not talk to us via your hands or whatever you use to type words into a computer? And send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.